All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the NPTE podcast. This is Will Crane, your host. Thank you so much for joining me as we talk through the content you need to know in order to absolutely dominate on test day. So today we'll be talking a little bit about study strategies. I know a lot of folks who are listening to this are just usually we're talking about the start of your main study cycle, or perhaps you're right in the middle of the study cycle, or perhaps you're just looking for ways to boost your studies as you get closer and closer to test day. So as I record this session, we're just coming into the April 2023 cycle, but certainly this will apply to any cycle down the road. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about something called distributed studies. So we're talking study strategies and ways to get the content to actually stick better in your mind. Now, as a part of our VIP program, I do have a series of lectures that talk about how to get content to stick and stick long-term, because clearly that's what you have to do on test day. You have to not only know the content, but be able to reason with it and problem solve with it on a multitude of questions, not just recognize it. And if I were to have a nickel for every time someone told me that, hey, they read the textbook, but yet they still failed the test, they read O'Sullivan cover to cover and they still failed the test. Really, it comes back down to, all right, not only number one, you need to know the content, but number two, you need to be able to do more than just recognize it. And so that's what we're talking about today, is how to take your studies and level them up to the next level. And that's what I want to talk about today with regard to study strategy. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about distributed practice. So as you know, on test day, there are a number of questions, and really the questions are related to problem solving within the content. So I get this question all the time. Will, is the test academic or is the test clinical? And the truth is that it's a little bit of both. You've got the clinical application of academic principles, meaning that you have to know the content. You have to know everything about the content, and then you have to be able to problem solve with that content in specific cases. So how do you get the content to stick long-term? And that's really the key here. Long-term content retention, it requires several things, and I've got them listed here. Those of you watching this on YouTube, and I'll just describe those of you who are listening to this on the podcast. Distributed study is really all about getting an initial bolus of information at the start. It's where you spend a bunch of time on the content. You can't get away from this. You have to be able to see the content and make sense of it. And this is where very often I feel like the very best way to get this first part done is to put it into your own words. So for instance, as you're studying and you see something that seems to be a complex or complicated principle, try to put it into your own words. And this is where a lot of times you see students that'll do this. They'll create a flashcard of a difficult concept, but really the key to making a good flashcard is making sure that it's in your own words, but summarized in a way that makes sense in your mind. So number one, distributed study, you have to spend time to learn the content the first time. Then this is the key though. After you've learned it the first time or seen it the first time, you must return to it multiple times. Now, as you recall, in motor control, distributed practice just means that the rest time is greater than the practice time. This means that you have a spacing or a pulse, a duration, a latency period from when you study it until you study it again. What that does is it helps improve long-term memory retention because you are revisiting the content again and again and again. So ideally, it would look something like this. Let's say on day one, you study material one, whatever it is. You're studying special test of the shoulder, you're studying special test of the knee, studying neuromuscular disorders, whatever it is, spend some time learning it. But the next day, spend about 15 minutes reviewing what it is you looked at the day previous. So think of it this way, that it's a 15-minute, very quick, high-level review of what you saw the day before, so as to make sure that it is retained for that day. And chances are, as you look at it the day after, you'll say, okay, yeah, I clearly remember this. I just studied it yesterday. Now, you'll need to do this a number of times over the course of 6 weeks. So, and that's usually what we're talking about, 6 to 10 weeks as far as a study time. But you'll return to that content maybe every other day for a few days, but then certainly once a week going forward. And again, it has to be brief and high level, but it helps to remind you of things you already studied. So there's a lot of statistics. I've seen varying numbers here, but it usually takes somewhere between 3 and 8 repetitions for something to actually start to stick. And in fact, there's some research stating that it can take up to 30 repetitions before something really starts to be locked in long-term memory. So a little technique here is, as you are reviewing it, try this. Try to actively remember what it is that you studied. So this doesn't have to be terribly complicated. Really, what you're trying to do is just to think of it this way. Like if you're trying to remember someone's name that you just met them and you're trying to figure out, all right, how do I remember their name? This repetition, or what's called mega drilling, you actively recall the content 30 times in a row, and then that tends to make it stick. And it's more than just repetition, it's that active recollection. And then combine this with, and this is again related to the distributed practice, perhaps even in the middle of your study session, as you feel your focus start to fade, or maybe you've looked at something for a while and you're still kind of working your way through it, take a minute and just relax. Like try to do something that draws your brain to nothing. So like classical music, or something that just kind of wipes the slate clean in your brain. Then you can come back to the content. And again, it's a style of mini distributed practice. And that's what leads to that long-term memory retention. So clearly you have to initially see the content, then you have to be able to return to it frequently and just repeat. So that's what distributed practice looks like. And really the key here is that you are improving long-term memory retention by revisiting the content with time in between. The biggest mistake I see students make is that they will study a concept, but then not return to it for like 6 or 8 weeks. And then they wonder why they've forgotten it, or they can't apply it on a test question. Well, it's because they may have seen it one time or seen it 6 weeks ago, but it just tends to disappear. That's what's called attrition of material. It just disappears out of your brain with the process of time. So distributed study practice, or distributed practice, again, this is a principle of motor control, but it's also a principle of studies, helps you to get long-term memory retention simply by spending time with the content with pulsed or rest periods in between. Usually we're talking days. And clearly you have to learn the content the first time. It's not like you can avoid that long study process of actually seeing it and learning it. But this is where we're talking about long-term memory retention. All right, so with that, we'll bring today to a conclusion. Like I said, today was just a study tip, try to get you on the right path headed for test day. I hope you check out the other episodes we have where we go through a number of practice questions. If you haven't already, be sure to leave us a 5-star review over on Google Play or iTunes, wherever you listen to this podcast. In the meantime, stay safe, Will Crane fist pumps all around, and I will catch you in the next episode. Thanks.